Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video, and in this video we are going to be looking at the 2021 Canadian election. So, I ran a poll a couple of weeks ago asking you guys if you wanted to see it, or see a video on the Canadian election. We got 472 votes, which I'm pretty glad we had decent turnout, and around half of you guys said you were very interested, another 21% said you were somewhat interested, 18% said you were neutral or don't know much about Canadian politics, and that's okay. I'm here to teach. 4% said someone is interested, and only 8% said not interested. So, only 12% of you guys just didn't really care. So, I'm really glad that 88% of you guys were at least somewhat interested or ready to try something new. But I'm definitely going to be making a video about this. And, yeah, so before we get into it, couple of things. I'll briefly do my best to run over the Canadian political parties and landscape. Wait, what just happened? I don't know what just happened there. But, so you might be better off watching a JJ McCullough video. JJ is one of my favorite Canadian political YouTubers, and I really appreciate what he does. He is a conservative, so if you are more left-wing, you might not necessarily agree with what he says, but his videos are still pretty unbiased. They're not, overly, he is not a Red Eagle politics, if that's what you're thinking, but I enjoy watching his videos. Pretty good guy, and he makes good videos with Canadian politics, so I think you should check him out if you are kind of new to this. But basically, Canada has, I would say, 6 main political parties. They're listed here. So, you have, right now, the current governing party is the Liberal Party. So, as you can probably tell by the name, that is the left-wing party. It's not, very far left-wing, but it is a center-left party. It's, I'd say, a little bit to the left of the Democrats, especially on issues like climate change and government spending. But they're still pretty similar with the Democrats. I'd say Justin Trudeau is basically like Joe Biden, except he is, younger and more charismatic, and, he is a little more left-wing, but they're pretty similar. The Conservatives are different from the GOP, though. They are the more conservative party in Canada, but I'd say they're basically right in the middle, because Canada is a left-wing country, and, politics do skew left. I think the Conservatives are basically right in the middle of the political spectrum, maybe a little to the right, but their current leader, Aaron O'Toole, he is pro-choice, he is pro-LGBTQ rights, he is, even pro-universal healthcare, which is the system in Canada. So the Conservatives are, conservative on issues like, climate change. And, I think the main difference between the two parties is just rhetoric, because, Aaron O'Toole, the leader for the Conservatives, he is, talks about cancel culture and, the left-wing mob, which is stuff that Republicans usually talk about. Justin Trudeau doesn't do that. So that's I think rhetoric is just one of the main differences between Conservatives and Liberals in Canada. Now, the NDP is the most left-wing or prominent left-wing party in Canada. You could have a debate about whether it's the NDP or the Greens. We'll get into that in a second. But the NDP is the New Democratic Party. It is led by Jagmeet Singh, and it is it's kind of fringe progressive / democratic socialist party. They are to the left of the Liberals, and they do kind of criticize Justin Trudeau from the left, saying he's not doing enough to help people from COVID. Not doing enough spending. I guess you could say that, and the NDP kind of is just there. It's kind of like the Bernie Sanders wing of Canada. If I had to give you an American politician that best represents each party, I'd say for the Conservatives, maybe Phil Scott or Charlie Baker or Lisa Murkowski, kind of in that range. The Liberals, probably Pete Buttigieg would be a good example of that. And then for the NDP, definitely Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders. Now, for the Greens, that's because the Greens are kind of a fringe party. They right now have 3 seats in Parliament, but that's very iffy. And spoiler alert, they're going to lose at least one of those, likely. You can probably tell by the name, they are the Green Party of Canada. They're basically like the Greens in America, so I guess you could say Jill Stein. Then you have the Bloc Québécois. So the Bloc Québécois is a party that only runs candidates in Quebec, really, and they are a Quebec nationalist party. And when I was first researching this election, and for the record, I'm not as good with Canadian politics as I am with American politics. I'm American. I've been paying attention to American politics for longer. It's also kind of more dramatic, so there's that. But before I knew much about this, it was 2019, before they had their October 2019 general election, for some reason I had this idea in my head that the Bloc were a right-wing nationalist party. They are a nationalist party, but they're actually quite left-wing. Their social stances are pretty left-wing. They're a, standard left-wing party, but the only thing that they really differ from the Liberals on is that they are in support of Quebec nationalism. So, they want to make French the national language of Canada. They want to kind of make Quebec more self-governing, and some in the party wanted to become an independent country. So the Bloc Québécois is an interesting party to talk about. It's, I wouldn't really consider it to be a left or right-wing party. I think it's more of a nationalist, populist party, if that makes more sense. But I would consider them to be quite an interesting party to look at. So then you have the People's Party of Canada, which is basically the Trump wing Canada. It's actually quite small because Canada is not a super right-wing country. As I said, I consider Canada to be one of the most progressive countries in the world. But the PPC, or the People's Party of Canada, has had one seat in Parliament all time, and it is the former leader Maxime Bernier. And, Maxime Bernier, he was originally elected as a Conservative in a seat in Quebec called Beauce. He then changed to a member of the People's Party, and he lost re-election in 2019. So they're not really a serious contender. Of these six, they're definitely the smallest. But, so that's my brief rundown of the parties. So I think that's all the background I need. Also, I guess to give you guys kind of to make more American parallels, because most of my viewers are American. I think I was looking at stats, and I think like 80% of my viewers are American. Another 10% are Canadian, like 8% are British. No, that's not right. It's like, I think 75% American, but I get some Canadians, second largest, British, third largest, and then I got, those people from Brazil, Mexico, Spain, France. Like, I'm pretty proud of I think I have viewers from like 80 countries, so, that's cool. And I also think someone DM'd me saying that they were from Cyprus, which that's probably the smallest country I've gotten someone from. But anyways, to make American parallels, the Conservatives are kind of they get votes in both some conservative suburbs. It really depends on the suburbs. The suburbs are definitely split between liberals and conservatives. But, they get votes in these western areas, the prairies, so, Alberta, or, I call British Columbia Alberta. No, this is Alberta. For the record, I did Google it to make sure I wasn't going crazy. This is Alberta, this is British Columbia, this is Saskatchewan, and this is Manitoba. But, the prairie provinces are where the Conservatives get most of their votes from, even in urban areas, like Calgary, for example, or Edmonton. These are pretty blue, and again, in Canada, Conservatives are blue, so when I say blue, it doesn't mean Democrats, it means Conservatives. These are pretty blue areas, and the Conservatives, they get their votes from these areas, so some working class people, but mostly people in the oil industry, just typical rural conservatives. So, you might notice that, the rural voters are not populist. Like, the PPC, rural voters in Quebec are a different story, but rural voters in most of Canada vote for the Conservative Party, not the PPC, which is a common misconception because people think, in America, rural areas are populist, they probably vote for the PPC. Not really the case in Canada, except for a couple areas in Quebec. And Quebec kind of complicates Canada politically. That was a tongue twister. Quebec complicates Canada. But, anyways, moving on to the Liberals. The Liberal Party is the de facto left-wing party in Canada. They get votes from college-educated white voters. The majority of them, at least. You have them gathering support from minority groups, like, Asian voters in Toronto do tend to vote for the Liberal Party. You have black voters in Canada. I do think that they prefer the Liberal Party overall. So the Liberal coalition in Canada is pretty similar to what the Democratic coalition in America is. For the NDP, their votes are mostly from college towns. It's like I'll look at, the parliamentary map in a second, but it's college towns, some super urban areas, and then, as you can see, the only province they're winning, according to my projections, is Nunavut, which is a Native American, predominantly Native American province. So the NDP does quite well with Native American voters as well. The Greens just kind of do well with, like, random areas, college towns sometimes, just random progressive areas. They only have 3 seats in Parliament, so it's only so much. And then the Bloc Québécois, they do best in Quebec for obvious reasons. And they do best in, a lot of, there are voters in areas like Quebec City and in Montreal that prefer them. These are, like, older white voters. And there are also voters in rural Quebec that tend to split between them and the Conservatives. But I would say the Bloc takes more votes away from the Liberals than they do from the Conservatives. So I think that's all to cover for our background, because it's already been 9 minutes. And this prediction is going to go on for way too long just because I have so much to say here. But so this is my provincial map, and I will say this, to avoid confusion. This is not who I think is going to hold provincial government, because that's just not as interesting to me. It's like talking about, like, it's kind of like governor's races in America. Like, Massachusetts is like red on the governor's map, but it doesn't mean it's a red state, that kind of thing. So as I mentioned earlier, the British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, these are all pretty blue conservative provinces. They're going to stay blue. Now, the Conservatives, in case you already noticed, they're gaining in Yukon. Now, the Yukon is a territory that is currently, and I will pull it up on this map, the Yukon in Parliament is currently represented by a Liberal. So that is a flip. Spoiler alert, the Conservatives are going to flip the parliamentary riding, and they call in Britain they call them constituencies. In America they call them seats. In Canada they call them ridings. So they're going to flip that riding. Yukon, I think the Conservatives, and I'll talk about why in a second, but they're going to flip Yukon. So those are their 5 provinces. Now, the Liberals, they've got a few close calls, so they're likely going to hold on to the Northwest Territories. This is for a couple reasons. The Northwest Territories are, for the most part, what I would consider to be a pretty liberal area, and, this is mostly because you have a mix of white voters that are just liberal and progressive overall, and Native Americans. So the NDP does do okay here, but the Liberals usually win. Ontario, biggest province, kind of like the New York of Canada. Ontario is close just because of how big it is. Just to take a look at what you had in 2019. So in 2019, the Liberals, as you can imagine, did very, very well. In Toronto, as you can see, they won all these seats. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. They won all of these seats here. Just a couple went to the Conservatives, and in fact, the NDP didn't even win too many seats in Toronto. But the outside of Toronto and outside of London and Kitchener and Hamilton and Mississauga, the Conservatives did pretty well in Southern Ontario. They won kind of these ex-urban seats over here, and they won some of these rural seats over here. So they did quite well in Ontario, considering what they're expected to do. And there was talk about them potentially winning Ontario. It doesn't look like they're going to do that, mostly because of the polling we've seen, which does not indicate them winning Ontario, for lack of a better, I guess, way of saying that. But Ontario should, I would say Ontario is going to be a liberal hold. Now, in Quebec, the Conservatives, the Bloc are likely to finish in second place here. It could be the Conservatives, but in 2019 it was the Bloc. So, as you can see, just to, I guess, look at the 2019 Canadian federal election. So, looking at result by province and territory, in Quebec, the Conservatives only have 10 seats, compared to the Liberals having 35, and then the Bloc Quebecois, they have 32. So, the Bloc, they generally do, fairly well in Quebec, but I think this is going to be a down year for them, and I'll explain why. But the Liberals should hold on to Quebec, Then you've got the Maritimes. The Maritimes are kind of like the New England of Canada. They're very solidly blue. And then you have Newfoundland and Labrador. So Newfoundland and Labrador are like the Vermont of Canada. And, I say that mostly because they're, they're predominantly white, but they're just very liberal socially and culturally, so they never really go the other way. They're not really competitive. If you just look at the interactive map on Lean Toss-Up for their projections, which I know Lean Toss-Up, we'll talk about them in a second too, but, looking at all these ridings in Newfoundland and Labrador, I don't know why it highlights everything, but, when you look at them, Labrador, which is the upper part, they've got the Liberals with a 90% chance of winning there, and then in Newfoundland, they've got the Liberals with a 98% chance of winning there. Costa Bay's Notre Dame, they've got the Liberals 93% chance of winning there, and then, in what I think is the most interesting riding here, you've got Bonavista, Burin upon Trinity, which they have the Liberals at a 3 and 4 chance of winning. So, this area is what I would consider to be quite the liberal area, but it'll be interesting to see a couple of those seats. Now, the NDP, they're going to hold on to one province in Parliament, and that is Nunavut. And I say this because Native Americans, this is predominantly Native American area, tend to vote for the NDP, and it's mostly because the NDP's never really been in government, and we know in Canada and America, Canada to a lesser extent for sure, but still in nearly every country that has taken Native lands, there has been a level of abuse there, and there has been a level of distrust and a level of harm done by the government to Native American people. So that's certainly worth recognizing. I'm someone who cares about Native affairs. I'm someone who has researched Native affairs, especially in my home country of America. I've learned about the Battle of Bullhorn. I've learned about all the treaties that the United States signed that they gave up on 5 years later. So I understand why a lot of Native Americans are frustrated, and it's kind of because the Liberals and the Conservatives both have blood on their hands, and the NDP is the more progressive, more pro-Native American option there. So that's why the NDP, in short, and there are other factors too, but in short, that is why Nunavut does tend to vote for the NDP, like as you can see here. The NDP has the 1 seat in Nunavut, and they're probably going to hold it. Lean toss-up, which is like the best interactive projection thing you can use. Lean toss-up does have Nunavut winning it with 39% of the vote, which I know in America it doesn't sound like a lot, but in Canada you have a 6-party system, so them getting 40% of the vote, not too shabby, and they have a 95% chance of winning it. So let's get into the actual predictions. So these are my provincial predictions. The closest I would say for sure is definitely the Yukon, but I do think that the Conservatives are going to win it. And, why is that? Well, I'll talk about it right here. So just to look at lean toss-up, what they've got going on. Whoops, I cannot click on anything to save my life right now. But lean toss-up does a pretty good job of showing, the chances of this. And, just to address their accuracy, I know that they weren't great in 2020. In fact, I wasn't really a fan of them in 2020 for America. Actually, fun fact, they called me an idiot during my for saying Texas would go red. They had Texas going blue. I don't really care. It was one person who worked for Lean Toss Up. I don't really care if they think I'm an idiot for saying Texas would go red. But I'm willing to a certain degree defend the 2019 predictions. In Canada in 2019, they were pretty good with predicting a liberal minority government. And then in Britain, they were pretty good with Boris Johnson winning his coalition in Britain. But, they're Canadian, so I think that they're usually better at predicting Canadian elections than American elections, as you can see. But in the Yukon, they've got the Liberal Party with a 63% chance of winning, the CPC with a 30% chance of winning, and the NDP with a 7% chance of winning. So there are things going against the Liberals here. And first of all, you might have already figured this out, but the NDP is kind of a spoiler for the Liberals. That would be like us having a in an area like the Yukon, there are only really 3 parties that are actually going to get a significant amount of votes. And it's, the Bloc are the 3rd largest party in Parliament right now, but, they're obviously not ranking it up in the Yukon. So you've got really the NDP, the CPC, and then the LPC. So the Liberals are definitely the more popular party there. But at the same time, when you have 2 of the 3 parties being left-wing parties, and then the other one, the Conservatives, kind of consolidating that right-wing support, they can use the NDP as a spoiler there. And, there are ridings where it's the opposite, where the Liberals are spoilers to the NDP. But in the majority, the NDP are definitely spoilers to the Liberals. And that's apparent here because, I think we're going to see Native Americans, especially during the snap election, turn out for the NDP, kind of anti-liberal sentiment. Justin Trudeau's not very popular right now, and, nor is Erin O'Toole as a conservative, but both Justin Trudeau and Erin O'Toole's approvals are not good, and the Liberals have always had the benefit of being the more popular party, even when the Conservatives are in government, and right now, not looking too good for Trudeau's popularity. So in areas like the Yukon, I do think that the Liberals are going to underperform, and they'll do this in Northwest Territories as well. They're not going to lose it, but it'll be closer than people think, I believe. So same with Nunavut. I think that I could easily see the Liberals actually coming in 3rd place, because the NDP is just going to, I wouldn't be surprised if the NDP just smoked the Liberals and, Nunavut. I could see them getting 43-44% of the vote by just grabbing a bunch of Liberal votes and then, kind of giving it away to the to the NDP, and then the Conservatives kind of going up in second, not really gaining anything there. But so Yukon, that's a riding I think is important to watch. I'll be watching it, although their polls close pretty late. But I do think it'll flip to the Conservatives as a result of the spoiler effect. So there are also a couple other ridings that we can look at. So, I'm not going to make a riding by riding prediction because I don't know enough about Canadian politics to do that. And I could do it, and I could get a general sense, but I don't want to go overboard here and overestimate my knowledge because I don't want to get a bunch of random ridings wrong. So, we'll just take a look at it, some example ridings, and we'll take a look at them. So first you have Beauce, which is in southern Quebec, and it is a riding that this was a riding that Maxime Bernier actually held when he was the leader of the People's Party, and it's a rural farmland riding, and it usually voted conservative. In 2015, Maxime Bernier was elected as a conservative. Then he switched to the People's Party, which he founded, and then in 2019 he ran for re-election and lost his seat to a conservative. So, I would say that this is an area that, they might like the idea of populism, but they clearly preferred a conservative over a People's Party guy in 2019 by a pretty solid amount. It wasn't decided by 3 votes. It was I think an 8 or 10 point margin here. So it was a pretty impressive pickup for the Conservatives. They're likely going to hold it here. the PPC is actually running a candidate there, so they do have a decent chance of winning, and I think that the PPC is going to do all right here. And it's mostly because the Liberals in NDP just are really, really bad at consolidating votes in southern Quebec, and especially the NDP, because they always underperform Quebec and Ontario. Like, they do well in other places, but they do pretty poorly in Quebec and Ontario. But to make a long story short, areas like those are going to be at least pretty solid for the Conservatives, even though we might see a small PPC surge. Yeah. Now, I think that's it. I do want to highlight one thing, though, and it's that the regional appeal of each party. So the Liberals and the NDP split the left-wing vote for sure. And, the NDP, they do better in these native areas, especially in Nunavut. They also do better in Quebec and Ontario, and they just generally consolidate more support in Labrador, or in Newfoundland and Labrador, and also the Maritime provinces. Although it's not like because the NDP are bad; it's just because these areas are just so liberal that it kind of doesn't really matter. But in the prairies, in Western Canada, it's kind of the opposite, where we have the NDP. Like, taking a look at some of these ridings over here, like the best example I can think of, the Kootenay, Columbia, which is a one town kind of rural working class riding. And it is a riding that the NDP are expected to get 42% of the vote, which is pretty strong for them. And, that is interesting to see because, as you can see right now, the Liberals are leaning towards President getting 7% of the vote here. It's crazy to think that it really matters where you live, because there are left-wingers here, but, the populist left-wingers that live here that vote, that are working class voters, they vote for the NDP. They don't vote for the Liberals. They don't vote for the PPC. They vote for the NDP, and that is why the NDP is winning some of these seats. So, I think it would be better long term for the Liberals if the NDP didn't exist, but they wouldn't be winning these seats in Western Canada, or in some of these seats in Calgary or Edmonton or in Regina. So it is certainly interesting to see what the NDP is kind of doing over here, but just thought I'd point that out. It's very regional thing. Canada's politics are much more regionalized than America's are. So to zoom into Vancouver, just to see some of these cities. So Vancouver is I'd say the biggest city in Canada that's more pretty NDP. So the Greens also have their seats here. Elizabeth May, her seat as Saanich Gulf Islands. She wins every year, really. Or not, sorry, she's not the leader anymore. She used to be the leader, but that was her seat. But this is the most green territory in Canada, or province, riding in Canada. But anyways, the NDP are I would say that they're expected to win these areas in Vancouver. There are some competitive ones, I know that Burnaby North and Seymour, that is a lean NDP pickup, and they're expected to gain it from the Liberals. So it's kind of a Liberal versus NDP battle in the inner parts of Vancouver. But here's the thing: it's so close because the Conservatives, they only have a 0.4% chance of winning in this riding. But in other ridings, where they're polling at 25% instead of 22%. That's still quite an interesting result there. And, if we see one party take away a ton of votes from the other party, we can easily see someone flipping that riding. So we'll really have to see how this turns out. And again, I don't know as much about, I cannot tell you a ton of things about each individual riding I can about American counties or American House districts. But I can say that the general, from what I'm kind of getting, is that the NDP and the Liberals have a spoiler thing going on, and that could affect them in areas like Vancouver, in areas like Northern Ontario, like Northern Quebec, like Yukon, but it's not guaranteed to happen. It's not gonna if the Liberals lose government, which I again don't think it's gonna happen for the record, but if they do, the NDP will be part of it, but I don't think that they'll be the whole thing. The whole thing will be, hey, why'd you call a snap election when you're unpopular right now, that kind of thing. But I think that I've done enough playing around with the lean toss-up model. Actually, no, I haven't. Really quickly, just to look at Calgary. Calgary, as you can see, pretty big city, has over 1 million Canadians living there, all conservative. So cities in Canada, some of them can be quite conservative. The NDP actually does have a seat in Edmonton. It is... Oh, no, the Liberals do as well, but it's a pickup for them, I believe, for the Conservatives. But right now, as you can see, the NDP has a seat in Edmonton. So Edmonton is a little more competitive than Calgary, but still pretty blue overall. Anyways, let's get to my prediction. So I did not, like I said, I did not make a riding prediction, but what I did do is I did make a prediction for the popular vote. So in 2019, you might have already known this, but in 2019, the Liberals had the most seats. And when I say minority government, I mean, so a majority in Canada is having 170 seats out of the 338 seats, right? So that's what you need to have a majority. But if you have a plurality of seats, is what the Liberals had like after 2019, that's a minority government. That is what people would call a minority government, and it's pretty, I would say kind of like what a hung parliament in Britain looks like, where one party has the most seats but not a majority, which is what we had in Britain from 2017-2019 before the Conservative Party, or the Tories, won a ton of seats in 2019. They had a really good election that year. But in Canada, we right now have a hung parliament slash minority government, which is, 2019 was expected to be a better year for Conservatives, so the Liberals were happy with it at the time, but, now they're saying that they want a majority, which, to get a majority, they would need to gain 13 seats, so, they need to go from 157 to 170. So, in 2019, they won the most seats, despite actually losing the popular vote. So the Conservatives gained seats because 2015 was just such a good year for the Liberals, but the Liberals still held on to the most seats, and it's because Canada has a geography benefit to them as well. The seats the Conservatives won, I'll just look at lean toss-up again. They're winning random seats in Alberta, like this seat over here that I'd never heard of before, 62% of the vote. And in a 6-way system, or a 5-way system in this case, that is really big, right? So the Conservatives, their votes are, they get a lot of votes nationwide, but they're kind of condensed into these rural areas or cities like Calgary, oil ridings, and that's kind of how it works. Now, the Liberals, they're winning a bunch of ridings very narrowly. Like, they have a much lower floor than the Conservatives do, but they're usually in government just because of how spread out their appeal is. So, yeah. Now, the Liberals lost the popular vote, as I mentioned, but still the most seats. So, they, unlike the Democrats, have an advantage in that, they can lose the popular vote, but they can still win the most seats. So, this time around, I think they're going to win the popular vote. And it's only with 33.2% of the vote, so basically about a third of Canada is going to vote Liberal. Conservatives are going to follow close behind with 32%, and then with the NDP, they're going to surge. So in the polling we've seen, which Polling Canada does a very good job of doing this. Curtis Frick runs this account. He's a pretty good account. I really like what I have seen from it. But the latest poll had the Conservatives up. But this is Ipsos. The best poll I would say is Abacus, maybe Angus Reid for Canada. But Ipsos is not great. Same with Ecos, I believe. So they had the Conservatives winning with 32% of the vote, which is still a decline of 2%, because in 2019 they got 34%. So, what we see here is like the biggest surge here is the NDP. The NDP are getting 5% or gaining 5%, and that's hurting the Liberals obviously, but the PPC, which is also surging in the polls, apparently they're not getting as many. Like, I've seen polls the PPC at 9 or 10%, and they're only at 4% in this poll. So this poll is certainly having everything go, because like the PPC takes some votes away from the Conservatives. So when you see the NDP gaining but the PPC not gaining as much, that hurts the Liberals pretty much, to make a very long story short. But this poll is the Conservatives up by 1 federally. This poll, the Liberals up by 1 federally. And it really depends. Like, I'll say this: if the NDP get more than 20%, like if they get more than 20.5% of the vote on election night, that is not a good sign for the Liberals. I think that they're going to, because if the NDP gets more than 20%, okay. Scratch that. If the NDP gets more than 21.5% of the vote, the Liberals are going to lose the popular vote. And if the NDP gets more than 20% of the vote, the Liberals are not going to have a majority. So, if the NDP gets 19%, this is a potential majority government for the Liberals, because the PPC is surging, the Bloc are not losing as much as expected, the Greens are still losing, and the NDP is not gaining as much as expected. And they're holding on to the majority of the electorate, or to the plurality of the electorate in Canada. So, that poll was good news for the Liberals. This poll is decent for the Liberals. Again, Abacus is a poll I like. This poll is certainly not great for the Liberals, but it's okay for them. We saw some polling that kind of. I think I quote tweeted one. Here it is. I think it was Ecos. They had the Liberals winning by 5%, and the Conservatives going from 34% to 27%, which is again not as realistic, and they had the PPC going up to 10%, and then the NDP only at 19%. So, the worst polls for the NDP this cycle have been, them at 19% federally, which is still an improvement, because in 2019 they got, 16%, I believe. They got nearly 16%. So, they're still going to gain seats. The NDP, this is a good election for them. They're still going to gain seats, but their floor is, 18 to 19%, but their ceiling is, 23%. So, I would say, for sure, that when the NDP do worse in polls, that their support goes to the Liberals. When the PPC do better in polls, their support, they take that away from the Conservatives. So this poll over here from Ecos, which was a very bad poll for Conservatives. Remember, in Canada, polls actually underestimate the Liberals. Justin Trudeau was polling behind in 2019, but he still won. This poll was very bad news for Conservatives. And I guess it's Ecos. I'm not a fan of Ecos by any means, but this poll is not good for the Conservatives. That nationwide, they are losing by 5%. That is never a good sign, especially for a party that, despite winning the popular vote by 200,000 votes in 2019, they still did not come close to having a majority in Parliament. So that is what you should take away from this video. So again, back to my prediction. I do think that the polls are going to overestimate the NDP. They're polling at like 21% right now overall. I think they're going to get around 20%, which is a good, not great result for the Liberals. It's a good, not great result for the NDP as well, because they'll gain seats right now because they're at 24 right now. They'll be gaining 9. But this result is certainly a result that I would consider to be good, not great for the NDP. The Greens, they're going to lose a seat, and it's probably going to be in Fredericton. I don't know why I said Edmonton. Fredericton, where they elected someone, and then she kind of switched around parties. She was elected a Liberal, then became a Green, that kind of thing. But the Greens are going to lose votes because their party's been in kind of bad shape as of late. Like they got 5% of the vote in 2019. They're going to go down to 3.6%, I'd say. And the Bloc, this is a pretty bad election for them as well. Like, as I've said, in terms of polling, they have gained a little as of late, but, if they're down from 8, like, they got 8% of the vote federally in 2020, and, I wrote about this election on Substack, go check that out, but when the Bloc loses votes federally, that's bad for them because all their votes are in Quebec, so when they lose 1% federally, that might mean that they're losing 8% in Quebec, right, so that is not good for them, but anyways, they're polling at 7% in this poll. They've had some 7s as late. 7% in this poll. Whoa, I didn't mean to pull that up. But they've had polls there at 6%. They've had polls where they're at 6%. And I saw a poll where they were at 5% as well. So 6 and 7 has kind of become the consensus for the Bloc. I think they're going to do basically what polls are saying. I have them at 6.4%, which is 26 seats. It's like a week ago. I would have had them at 5 or 5.5%. So not terrible for them. They're at 26 seats, but it's still a loss of 6 seats. PBC are not going to gain any seats. They're just going to take away a couple of votes from the Conservatives. But long story short is this election is kind of a wash. It was called by the Liberals because they thought they'd get a majority back in middle of August. There was a point where the Conservatives, I think, were on track for the most seats. There was never a Tory path for a majority government, but there was a path for the Conservatives to get the most seats because they were leading in the polls by like up to 9% in some cases. But anyways, the Liberals, they're going to have the exact same amount of seats this when this election is done. The exact same amount, 157 seats. And the Conservatives, I think they're what are they right now? They're like at 120, which they're going to gain. No, it'll be literally the exact same. So a few seats will flip hands, but it'll be a net wash. The biggest winner in terms of seats gained, as a percentage, will be the NDP. They'll go up from 24 to 33. The Greens are going to lose a seat. The Bloc are going to lose 6 seats, and then the PPC are going to hold on to that massive 0-seat advantage that they have. But this video is super long. It's over half an hour, so if you stayed through it, I am glad you did because I had a lot of fun making this video. But yeah, there was a lot to go over here because I basically had to crash course you guys at the beginning on like the whole concept of the Canadian election, and a lot of you probably already know about that. But yeah, so that's my prediction. Liberals getting 157 seats. Conservatives having 121, NDP at 33, Greens at 2, Bloc at 26, PPC at 0. So it's a Liberal minority government. Snap election kind of a wash, but still Liberals holding on. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.